Welcome to the 2024 year ahead horoscope for Aquarius, Sun, and Rising. Now, I wrote these specifically for Aquarius Rising, but of course you can watch these for your sun sign or for any other placement that you might have in Aquarius. So I first want to start off with just the major transits of 2024. Now, I already did a general 2024 year ahead overview. If you haven't seen that video already, go ahead and check it out. Especially if you want to see just like my general opinions on like the mundane meaning of these transits, but I just want to go over the quick highlights for you so we kind of know what months are going to be crazy, what we're kind of looking at. The first thing is we have Pluto going back into Aquarius. So we had Pluto go back into we had Pluto first move into Aquarius in 2023, only for a few months, then it went back into Capricorn. This year it's going to be in Aquarius from January 20th until about September. Once we get to September, it will retrograde back into Capricorn, where it will stay for 2 months. And then by November 19th, Pluto will somewhat permanently move into Aquarius. It will not move back into Capricorn, and it will be there for essentially the next 2 decades. Then, in my opinion, we get the most exciting transit of the year, and that is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. This is something I'm looking forward to a lot. I think for you guys, too, given how your charts are, this ought to be pretty good. We'll talk about it as we go on. That's on April 20th. Super easy day to remember. Jupiter ingresses into Gemini on May 25th. Okay, so on paper, this is really good for you guys, but as we will talk about throughout this video, that comes with caveats. So we'll get to that. We have the Venus Cazimi Gemini on June 4th. There's a lot of fifth house transits that you guys are getting this year. And I mean, the fifth house has got to be the funnest house. So I think you guys have a lot to look forward to there. But our more meta long-term transit is the Jupiter-Saturn square. And we get 2 of these. The first one's on August 19th, and the second one is on December 24th. Now, there will be a third one, but that's going to be in Aries and Cancer, and that won't be till 2025. But this is the caveat I was talking about with Jupiter in your fifth house. That comes with some responsibilities, and so we'll go over it. And then by the end of the year, we have the Mars retrograde in Leo and in Cancer on December 6th. This is the worst part of the year, in my opinion, is this Mars retrograde. However, in order to understand 2024 better, you have to look at it as a build-up into 2025, because 2025 is when we have all of these major shifts happening in the astrology, and this is just somewhat of a build-up. So let's go ahead and get started. Actually, before we get started, make sure you like this video if you haven't already. Comment below as we go through. I want to know what is going to be your favorite month that you're looking forward to the most, and what month you're looking forward to the least. Subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to keep up to date with all of the major transits throughout the year, because I talk about every single one of them. And as well, if you want to keep up to date with when a transiting planet is hitting something specifically in your natal chart, go ahead and check out the transit calendar I offer over on my website. As you can see here, it's for iCalendar and Google Calendar. If you just click this little orange button, I have it as orange. You can set it to whatever color you want. This says that the transiting sun is going to trine my Saturn. It lets you know the day and the time of when a transiting planet is going to hit a planet in your birth chart. You can click it, and it'll give you an interpretation of what it means. I really like it. It's fun, so you don't have to open up an app. It's just right there on your calendar. As well, if you want to get even more in-depth about what this year and even next year and beyond looks like for you, feel free to book a consultation with me. And all of this is available at my website in the link in the description below. That's always such a mouthful to say. So let's go ahead and start talking about January. So what I like about 2024 is that on December 31st, Jupiter stations direct, and then on January 1st, Mercury stations direct. So there's a lot of like forward movement feeling going on at the beginning of the year. All the planets are direct. So I just think that's nice lining up with the beginning of the year. Mercury is stationing direct in your 11th house of friends, networks, and communities. Now, around December of, last year, December of 2023, Mercury would have went into shadow in your 11th house of friends. So there would have been maybe some miscommunications or some, things happening with friends. And Mercury would have then retrograded in your 12th house, which rules isolation, alienation, and, hidden enemies and things like that. So there might have been like a falling out with friends. There might have been a miscommunication with friends going on at the very end of the year. And so at this point, it's not that it gets resolved, but we're done backtracking, at least at this point. And you still have to kind of like, well, I shouldn't say you're done backtracking. You're done moving backwards, and now you have to kind of move through that whole area of the friendship again. I know it's a little confusing. Anyway, we move to January 4th, and this is when we have Mars ingressing into Capricorn. So the big thing here, and this is something to keep in mind as you're watching this video, knowing whether or not you were born in the day or night, if you have a day chart or a night chart. If you don't know how to figure this out already, If you look at your birth chart and you look at the ascendant and the descendant, if the sun is above that, which is the horizon, you are in a day. You are a day chart. And if the sun is below that, you are in a night chart. Why this is important is this differentiates which planets are more helpful and which planets are more harmful, like which planets aren't on your side and which planets are on your side. If you are a day chart, Mars is much more not on your side. Mars is much more problematic versus Saturn is much more on your side. We like Saturn, don't like Mars. If you're a night chart, Saturn is much more problematic and Mars is much more on your side. So keep that in mind as we keep talking about the year. I'm going to pull up the chart in just a second too, but especially once we get to February. But Mars moves into Capricorn, which does rule your 12th house of isolation, alienation, the subconscious, hidden enemies, fears, phobias. And the thing is with this is that, again, this is really dependent if you're a day or night chart of whether or not this is going to be bad. Mars rules fights, conflicts, inflammation, separation, cutting, but it does rule action and energy. And so when Mars moves into Capricorn, it's moving into its exalted sign, where in Capricorn, Mars does the best out of any zodiac sign that it's in. Yes, it rules Scorpio. Yes, it rules Aries, and it does well in those signs, but exaltation is just a little bit better. So that means Mars is going to be really, really strong here. Mars in the 12th house is like two things. Either one, being a little bit paranoid, having a little bit of paranoia, being really lost in your head, or two, working more behind closed doors, working more behind the scene. Like, for example, let's just pull up the chart here. As Mars moves into your 12th house, number one, Mars does rule your 10th house of career, reputation, and legacy, and it will be in your 12th house of hidden enemies, isolation, alienation, repressed, unacknowledged parts of yourself. And, well, and so a way I would look at that is like working really hard, but in isolation, doing a lot of deep work by yourself, getting a lot of things done. But it also rules your third house, short distance travel, neighbors, siblings, communication. That's all in the 12th. So you might have problems with neighbors or problems with your car. That's pretty much the gist of that. And so then we get to January 20th, and this is when we have Pluto ingressing into Aquarius. So the big thing here is a way that I feel like I've been able to relate it more to people is think about March of 2023 through like May and June of 2023. Pluto transits are easier to figure out what they mean in hindsight. And so rather than me just being like, oh, Pluto's going into your first house of you, your body, yourself, your image, your identity, you're going to feel empowered. That's true. And we'll get to that. But I just want you to think about March through like May and June of 2023. And if there was a vibe shift, like Pluto has been in your 12th house for like, I don't know, 16 years. Pluto rules fear, transformation, corruption, death, rebirth. It was going through your 12th house again of like isolation, the subconscious. So maybe there's a lot of paranoia things that happen and a lot of things behind closed doors. And Pluto going into your first house is now bringing an extreme change to your body and your image. That's the big thing. And there's one level of it that is very empowering, and there's another level of it that is very fear-based. Now, Pluto rules transformation at the end of the day. It's going to go through Aquarius for the next 20 years. So yeah, you're going to go through a transformation over the next 20 years. I think that's simple to say. But I would just think about the vibe shift from March of 23 to about May and June of 23. And what that felt like for you personally, especially around the area of like your head, like in terms of like things that you put on the back burner and fears versus like things that you wear out in front, things that are very obvious to you, your body, yourself. Did you feel more empowered? Did you feel disempowered? That sort of thing. And that brings us to February, because February is all first house stuff for you guys. So the first thing that we have going on is on February 13th is Mars is going to ingress into Aquarius and conjoin Pluto. So this is, I don't want to say bad, but it's, things get really extreme really quickly. The reason being is, again, Mars rules things like fights, conflicts, inflammation, cutting, separation. Let's do this. This is where we get to the tricky part of the chart and getting the time right. And with Mars in your first house, typically what you'll see is, you know, people being more frustrated, people being more aggravated. Watch out for injury. Watch out for, sorry, I got to turn these extra things off real quick. Just being more frustrated It's also your 10th ruler of career in the first house. So now, especially if you're like a day chart and Mars is fights and conflicts, like there might be more of, you might be more frustrated with your work or more vocal about your frustrations with work. But yeah, Mars conjoining Pluto, I've been looking at as like a power surge. It's really good for like a revolt or a revolution or like, finding your tribe. But Pluto corrupts things. And this is Aquarius. This is kind of like the sign of people, but it rules your first house of like you. So there's this like feeling empowered and enraged, I think is a really good way to look at this. This could be fear-based, but it's like Mars is here. I feel like you're going to be more raged than anything else, like maybe even a rage quit. But what's interesting about this is right after that, 4 days later on February 17th, Venus conjoins Pluto. So Venus will ingress into Aquarius, into your first house of you, the body, self-image, identity, and conjoin Pluto, where Mars is more of like chaos and problems and fights. But then, Venus joins the gang, and Venus is about beauty, pleasure, fun, romance, connection. She rules your 9th house of spirituality, and she rules your 4th house of home and family. And so there's this kind of like fun aspect to it, where if Pluto going through your first house is like, leaving you on edge, leaving you a little bit like feeling extreme, and Mars being there is like ramping that up. I think Venus, there's something fun about it. Like, have you ever been to a rage room? Reminds me of a rage room of like, you're someone that's like much more like passive and doesn't like really like do a lot of physical energy, and then like Venus comes in. It's like you go to a rage room and it's like actually fun to express that part of yourself. That's how almost I would look at this. What is nice about Venus going in your first house is like, you're looking better, you're feeling good. And then that brings us to February 22nd, where Venus conjoins Mars. And Mars and Venus together is like, yeah, this area is problematic, but I'm also having fun dealing with it. It's like, it reminds me of drama. Like, yeah, it's a little like, we don't like drama, but it is kind of fun and juicy to know people's business. And that's all happening in your first house of you, your body, self, image, identity. I feel like you're just going to be really charged up on February, like just full of energy, full of vitality. You got a lot going on, whether you like it or not. Feeling very clear, I think, is another way to look at this too. But that brings us to the 27th and the 28th. So this is when we have a Mercury and Saturn cazimi. If you're not familiar with what a cazimi is, that is when the sun conjoins a planet, or when a planet conjoins the sun and it resets that planet's like synodic cycle. The way I like to analogize it is it's like that planet's birthday for the year, quote unquote, the year. I say that in quotes because Mercury has 6 to 8 cazimis a year, depending on, the context. So it goes cazimi quite often, and Saturn gets a cazimi once a year. So the first thing that I really want to talk about is the Saturn one first. So Saturn has been in Pisces since March of 2023. The way I like to think of Saturn moving into a new zodiac sign and moving direct is like you have just started a new job and you were getting on the spot training. Since March of 2023, Saturn, which is your ruling planet, so it's a bigger deal for you than most people, has moved into your second house of money, finances, and resources. So there's been a big like, where do you need to be? And Saturn rules responsibility, maturity, time, restrictions, discipline, limitations, and boundaries. So there's been a little bit of tightness related to finances and possessions, where maybe you've been trying to save, maybe you've been trying to budget, maybe you've been trying to be more responsible about your income. And so since March of 2023, Saturn ingressed into there, you had to be more responsible. And then Saturn moved forward from March till June. And that was like being introduced to your new responsibilities, introduced to your new obligations with money. And then when Saturn stationed retrograde in June and moved backwards, this is that part of the job where you're like, okay, you're not getting on the spot training anymore, but it's still your first couple days or weeks, and you're still trying to figure out certain things. You're not super enough, but you're not super familiar with everything yet. And so from June to November of 2023 was like, okay, you've been introduced to all these new responsibilities. Now it's about integrating with them. Now it's about like doing the way I've been analogizing it to is like March through June was kind of like doing the classroom work, versus, June through November of 2023 was like doing the field work. Like, okay, where do you actually have to budget? Where can you actually be more conservative with your cash? Where do you actually need to be saving? It's also Saturn. Like if you're Saturn Nitra, it's like, where have you just not had access to money, and how have you figured that out? And then in November of 2023, Saturn station direct, move forward. This is where we feel a little bit more comfortable. You have it's like your third or fourth month on the job. Like, you know what you're doing at this point. But that leads us to now when we start talking about the Saturn Cazimi, because now this is a restart. This is now the new information. So when we get to February 28th, this is like, okay, I've handled this area and now I'm being introduced into new topics of how I need to be more disciplined with money, finances, and resources. What are my new restrictions with money, finances, and resources, etc. So that happens here. This is a big deal for you guys. Now, the other thing is we do get the Mercury Cazimi. This one's a little bit tough because Mercury does rule your 8th house of other people's resources, debts, death, taxes, inheritance. And so Mercury is in your 2nd house of money. So there's some sort of, communication with other people's money related to your money. And a Mercury Cazimi is like a light bulb moment. Like, oh, you receive some sort of information, you receive some sort of text message, or an idea goes off. The problem with this is like in a Mercury Cazimi is typically like associated with like clarity. However, the problem with this is Mercury's in detriment. Mercury doesn't do well in Pisces. So it's like maybe you're like, all right, I need to be more, like maybe you're saving up for a house, which would be funny because of the whole Jupiter thing, or maybe you have a house, maybe you're trying to just budget and you're going over your numbers and you're looking at your debt. Like this would be kind of like maybe you're in more debt than you expected, or maybe there's something wrong about the information that you're receiving around money. That's what I would expect around here. So then that brings us to March. March is when we have the Mars-Uranus square. This is on March 9th. We get that is in your 1st house and your 4th house of the self, the body, and related to the home and family. Okay. This one's a little chaotic for you guys because, whoops, let's do this. Will that even let me know? Mars, again, fights and conflicts. You guys are going to be a little bit on edge. It's going to square Uranus in your 4th house of home and family. You might piss off your parents. Your parents might piss off you. Something that you do might break something. Like maybe you're like, I'm going to do this all of a sudden. Like let's say you put up like, I don't know, a random shelf. Like Mars is fights and frustration and it's squaring Uranus, which is like instability, chaos, random events. It is liberation and freedom and innovation. But when it's receiving a square from Mars, this is like things snapping and things breaking. So I'd expect probably a problem at home, maybe even related to the car or a neighbor situation. Possibly career related, but this is really a home situation. Then on March 11th, we get to Venus ingressing into Pisces. Now, this is nice because it's in your 2nd house of money and possessions. And now that Saturn's been in your 2nd house where you've had to be more disciplined and responsible and mature, Venus really lightens the mood here where it's like, maybe you've been budgeting and saving up and you've not been buying anything nice, but you've made a little saving stash to like buy yourself something nice. That's like what this is. And Venus is exalted in Pisces. It does really, really well here. It does rule, again, your 9th house of spirituality and religion and your 4th house of home and family. Maybe you get to spend some money on your living situation or something that you've wanted for your home. And you can do it correctly because, again, you have Saturn in your 2nd house. Like you've been more responsible and mature in this area. But now with Venus coming in, you get to splurge a little bit. Or on the flip end, is like you don't have much money, and then Venus comes in. What money you get, you're just spending it on pleasures. Let's try not to do that, but either way. Then we get to March 18th. This is when Mercury enters shadow. This is really when the craziness of April begins. January is, for you guys specifically, everything's going to be really in your head. Then by February, you're feeling good, feeling motivated, getting a lot of stuff done. March is just a weird month in general. And then when Mercury enters shadow on the 18th, this is then building us up for April, which April is the craziest month of the year. Mercury will enter shadow, which means it will retrograde in your 3rd house of siblings, neighbors, short distance travel. Now, a few other ways I look at the 3rd house is applying knowledge that you already have. The 6th house is more of like habits and routines versus the 3rd house is more of like, what do you do in your free time? What do you schedule? It also rules writing, communication, technology. There's a lot of Mercury in 3rd house things that really intersect. And so Mercury is going to enter shadow on the 18th. So there's going to be something that happens here on the 18th, whether it's a communication with a neighbor, with a sibling, possibly even a car issue. Mercury also does rule your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation. And so as Mercury enters shadow and Mercury's about to retrograde here, maybe you're thinking about, how do I incorporate more of a creative, energy into my day-to-day life? How do I, maybe you're getting into creative writing, or maybe you've been, trying to do more fun things around your local area. That's what this might end up looking like. And then that brings us to March 25th, which is the lunar eclipse in Libra, and we begin eclipse season. This is in your 9th house of spirituality, religion, education, far distance travel. And it also rules publishing, broadcasting, social media. And the problem with this is the South Node's been here for a while. And I would have you think about what was going on around October 12th and 13th of 2023, because that's when we had a solar eclipse in Libra. The 9th house being about spirituality, religion, beliefs, and higher education. Did you like with the South Node being there, is like your beliefs or your relationship with God is draining. You're moving on from a state of learning. And the North Node in your 3rd is like in a state of applying your knowledge. Like the South Node is like, I don't want to learn anything. I've learned enough. The North Node in Aries is like, I need to actually apply all of the knowledge that I have. And so with this lunar eclipse in your 9th house, I feel like this is kind of like a one, it could be a revisit to learning. Secondly, or a revisit to, again, your spirituality. Like, are you sure the South Node is here? Sure, maybe you're doing a elimination diet with your beliefs, with your religion, but this is kind of like, all right, let's look back at this area. Like, what has changed since October? What have you gotten rid of? What have you moved on from? And another part of it is like, maybe you still need to unlearn some things and still keep applying what you need to apply, or maybe because you're so focused on what you're needing to apply, you have to kind of go back to the drawing board and relearn something as you go along. So then that brings us to April. April's really the craziest month of the year. First, we have Mercury stationing retrograde on April 1st. Again, this is all that 3rd house stuff that I was telling you about. Delays, restrictions, miscommunications with, again, neighbors, siblings. It's your 8th house ruler in the 3rd. So this is kind of like, if you live in an apartment complex and there's like a shared resource, like something could be wrong with that. It's also your 5th ruler of creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, where, maybe you're thinking about how can you incorporate more of the creative stuff with people around you? How can you be more expressive of that sort of thing? Mercury just rules weird parts of your chart. So, and all I can do in these videos is just give you the general outline, and it's up to you to apply this context into your own lives. But sometimes as like when I have like clients, like it's easier to figure out what things mean. But like on a general level, I'm like, your Mercury's ruling your 8th house and 5th house, and it's retrograding in your 3rd. The 3rd house is like the junk drawer of the chart. So it's always hard to get very specific with it. But then by April 8th, we get to the solar eclipse in Aries. So I don't remember if I said this before, but we're in eclipse season. Eclipse season is the wildest 2 weeks of every 6 months. So this is when major doors are opening and closing. And this is happening, again, in your 3rd house of siblings, neighbors, and short distance travel. So there's some sort of, again, and 3rd house could also be communication, writing, technology, application of knowledge. And so look how much 3rd house stuff is going on here. This could be like, your computer breaking, your phone breaking, problems with a neighbor. And this is an eclipse, right? This is like an emergency event kind of a feeling like you need to like absolutely go in a specific direction and just like take advantage and optimize every single part of your day. Now, the problem with this is on this eclipse, 2 days later, we have a Mars-Saturn conjunction, which these are typically, and this is on April 10th, these are typically big deals in and of themselves, but the fact that we have a solar eclipse in Aries, and of course Mars rules Aries, and then Mars is going to conjoin Saturn, that's a pretty big deal in my opinion. Mars-Saturn conjunctions, they're literally the 2 malefic planets conjoining each other. The way I've had people think about the Mars-Saturn conjunctions is think about lockdowns in 2020. Because when the lockdowns happened, that was on a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. So this would have been in your 1st house of your body, yourself, your image. But that kind of extreme feeling of, everything bad being pointed into one direction, that's happening here, but with your 2nd house of money. So it's like, Saturn in your 2nd house, you're having restrictions with money or having to be more responsible and disciplined. And then Mars comes in and it's like, well, Mars going through your 2nd house is like burning through cash. and it's in your third house. Maybe maybe you have to buy a car. Maybe some technology breaks that's really important for your work. I can't tell you what exactly it's going to be. You're going to have to let me know in the comments below what ends up happening, but this is super important. This is kind of like quote unquote the worst day, but, and this is what's so weird about this year. It's like, okay, these really hardcore things happen, but then 10 days later on April 20th, we get the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is in your fourth house of home and family and living and parents and stuff like that. So, okay, a way I would analogize this is like if you've had a house on the market for a long time, it magically sells. It's your second ruler of money and finances and resources conjoining like in your fourth house of home and family. So maybe you've expanded your home. Maybe you've gotten a lot of equity in your home. Maybe you spent a lot of money on your home. That's kind of been Jupiter in your fourth house since like May of 2023. But Uranus is like unexpected, sudden events happening, liberation, freedom, innovation. And so just your second ruler conjoining Uranus in the fourth is just kind of like, oh, all of a sudden I somehow like, double the equity in my house, or my house that's been listed forever finally sells, or maybe you've been in the housing market forever and you finally get a house. Like that's almost how I would look at this. It's also your 11th house ruler too of friends and community and networks, and that's conjoining Uranus in the fourth. I know a couple of personal stories of people either that were my clients or on Patreon, but they were just talking about like crashing with friends or like their friends crashing at their house, that sort of a thing. Somehow friends are involved with this, or your local network or community are involved in this. Maybe your friend buys your house. Maybe it's something like that. But then Mars moves into Aries on April 30th. This is when the energy really intensifies. We like Mars in Aries because Mars rules Aries. It's going to your third house, again, as siblings, neighbors, short distance travel. But it will be in the same sign as the North Node. So I want you to think about the last time Mars was here. This would have been about May and June of 2022. What was going on for you related to short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, communication, technology, writing? That was going on in about May, June of 2022. This will be very similar. I would argue this isn't as explosive, but more heat, if that makes sense, because Mars will be with the North Node, where there's this like, especially for your 10th house ruler of career and reputation, and your third of like, I got to write this or I got to do that, and I'm here, I'm there. There's a lot of energy and activity going on with short distance travel and just that whole third house area. Anyway. So that brings us to May. And before I go over this whole list of everything in May, I kind of just want to show you May real quick, because when we look at May, most of May is going to have Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Uranus, and Jupiter all in your fourth house. So there's a lot of good transits happening in your home and family and living situation, like a lot of good stuff. So I think this is a really good year for enjoying your living situation. I really do, especially after that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. By May 13th, Mercury leaves shadow. We are all done with the slowdowns and the working backwards and the replanning and the reorganizing of the third house. That moves on by May 13th. And then shortly after that, Mercury will move into Taurus. Then we have Mars conjoining the North Node on May 19th. This is, again, just Mars ingressing into Aries is a lot in and of itself, just being in the presence of the North Node. But this is like, and again, Mars has fights and conflicts too. So this might be getting in like extreme fights with your neighbors, or fights with your car, fights with siblings, feeling like you just can't get out of having to do a lot of short distance travel, like to an extreme way that like almost pisses you off. Okay. It's kind of a weird transit, but anyway, then once we get to May 25th, Jupiter ingresses into Gemini. So again, like I was saying earlier in this video, I really like this for you guys, but it will come with caveats, so just stick around. It's in your fifth house of creativity, love, romance, sex, children, hobbies, music, art. Jupiter expands. Jupiter's about fortune and abundance. And so we like Jupiter going into the fun house of the fifth house. Jupiter also rules things like faith and spirituality and beliefs. So there's a lot of look at like, what are your beliefs about love, romance, sex, pleasure, and even things like children and even things like creativity? What is it that you want here? It's your second ruler, though, of money going into detriment in the fifth house. Jupiter doesn't like to be in Gemini. Jupiter can't do two things. Jupiter through the fifth is a classic transit of pregnancy, so watch out for that. And that's definitely your second ruler in the fifth. Like all of a sudden I got to spend money, or maybe it's like twins because it's Gemini, and you're like, that's double the money. But it's also your 11th ruler of friends in detriment in the 5th. And the 5th house is like games and recreational activities, and the 11th house is like who you do those things with. But your 11th house ruler of like the things that you do people with is in detriment of the 5th, where it's like, you know, the people that you're hanging out with, you don't really like the things that you do with them. Or maybe you're getting into new certain hobbies and recreational activities, but you don't really have any friends that will join you to do that. Okay. So there's a big expansion with love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation. And again, we like that on the surface, but it is in detriment. It is in Gemini. It's trying to do two things. It's trying to have its cake and eat it too. And we will learn throughout the rest of this year that is not going to end up happening, but enjoy it for what it is by the end of May. And then that brings us to June. June is a lot of fun. Actually, before I get to this transit, going back to Jupiter and Gemini, I want you to think about the last time Jupiter was in Gemini, and that would have been around the summer of 2012. Think about May, June, July, even August of 2012, and what was going on with love, romance, sex, pleasure, recreation, children. This will be a very similar event. But then we get to June 4th, and this is the Venus Cazimi in Gemini. Now, again, this is still in your 5th house, so we're still talking about the same topics, but this is like a reset in this area. Just like every 8 years, Venus goes retrograde in the same exact zodiac sign. Venus has her exterior conjunction with the sun, which is a Cazimi, in the same exact sign every 8 years. So I want you to think about what was going on in about May and June of 2016. Was there something new that you were starting? Was there something new that you were beginning related to Venus topics? So 4th house of home and family and living situation, as well as 9th house of spirituality, religion, astrology, teaching, publishing, broadcasting, social media, higher education, far distance travel. Think about what could start relative, like again, because I mean, also look at all this 5th house stuff. It's like Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Sun. There's a lot of fun recreational things going on here that really begin in June. So I think that's really exciting for you guys. But then June 8th, Mars ingresses into Taurus. So 4th house of home, living, parents. This reminds me of like if you're like you and your partner buy like a house flipper, or like it just needs a little TLC, and you spend all of May doing it, and then you get to June and you're like you know, the walls aren't finished and you just stop working on the walls or something like that. Like Mars is fights and conflicts, right? It goes into detriment into Taurus, so it slows down. It gets real stubborn. So this might even be fights with parents, but there's a lot of stubborn slowness. Your 10th ruler of career is in detriment in the 4th, so it's like there's a lot of issues coming from the home and family that is stopping you from doing the work that you need to do. It's also your 3rd ruler of neighbors in detriment the 4th, where I mean, again, like if you live in a shitty neighborhood, you have shitty neighbors, you may not really enjoy that fucking house that you have. That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from this. Slowness, frustration, stubbornness related to home and family. Then on June 14th, we get the Mercury Cazimi, still in the 5th house. There's just one thing after another with your 5th house that's just getting a restart or refresh. So I think this is an awesome time for creativity. I just also think it will end up costing some money. That brings us to June 30th, and that's the Saturn retrograde. Again, like I said before, this was all classroom work. Now it's time to do the field work. Like Saturn retrograding in your 2nd house of money and possessions, money probably slowing down a little bit. You guys needing to be more disciplined, more mature when it comes to finances and resources and what you spend and what you don't do. Having to be a little bit more conservative with that cash. That's kind of the thing that's going on here. Maybe even like Saturn going retrograde and direct, like both times is always just like, you know what you have to do at this point. Then we get to July, and the biggest thing to say here is like January through June is like the most active time where the most things are going on. The summer really slows down. But on July 15th, we get the Mars-Uranus conjunction in your 4th house of home, family, living situation. We had one of these in 2022. I want you to think about the end of July, beginning of August of 2022. And what happened in terms of living situation? Did something explode? Did something get out of control? Because Mars conjoining Uranus is definitely like, this got out of hand, or, you know, again, because Uranus is instability and liberation and freedom, and Mars is fights and conflicts. And Mars, the analogy I've been using for Mars conjoining Taurus, Mars conjoining Uranus and Taurus is like, if you've been sleeping in your bed for like a month or two and you have literally not gotten out of your bed in a month or two, like legitimately got out of it, even for the bathroom. If you all of a sudden, like let's say there was a fire and you had to get up from your bed, your legs would snap. They would literally snap. Or you'd get a blood clot and die. That's kind of the Mars Uranus thing where it's like there's a lot of slow movement and it's really frustrating. Then it conjoins Uranus and then boom, it just blows up. So just what, again, fights and conflicts related to neighbors, siblings, short distance travel, and family and parents, as well as like problems with work and career given what you're doing at home. Then Mercury ingresses into shadow on July 16th. Mercury will actually retrograde in your 8th house. We'll talk about that. But it's going to deal with relationship stuff because Mercury will retrograde back into Leo. So this will have to deal with relationships, your partner, your spouse, any other major individual. There will be some sort of miscommunication, some sort of a delay, some sort of a misinterpretation of something, especially, again, to Mercury ruling your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure. It's in your 7th house of relationships. This is kind of like the what are we kind of talk. And that's going to come up. But that brings us to Mars in Gemini on July 20th. Now, we had Mars in Gemini for like 9 months between 2022 and 2023. So think about September to March of 2023. September of 22 to March of 23. That was the last time we had Mars in Gemini. Now, that was a Mars retrograde, and that arguably is a lot worse. But that's going to give you a good idea of what Mars in Gemini is going to look like. You know, if Mars is energy and ambition and drive, it's in your 5th house. So again, love, romance, sex, pleasure. You're doing this, you're doing that. You're picking up, disc golf, and you're picking up the theremin, and you're, also trying to learn Taekwondo. I don't know. Like there's just a lot that you're trying to juggle by this point. And Mars going into Gemini is now like, Jupiter's like, oh, you've expanded this area, but Mars is now like, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. And as time goes on, that energy will only slowly build up more and more to some sort of a breaking point. So that brings us to August. Once we get to August, we'll have Mercury stationing retrograde in your 8th house. That's on the 5th. So again, other people's money, death, debt, shared resources, all of that stuff. There's going to be a delay, a miscommunication, a rethinking. Like this would be like refinancing your debt or structuring your debt in a different way. This would even be, because it's 5th house stuff, like rethinking about some of the things that you want. And again, a lot of this has to do with partners, because if you are in a relationship, Mercury will enter shadow in your 7th house of relationships. So this might be a slowdown in your partner's money. This might be a restructuring of your partner's finances that will eventually get cleared out by the time we get to September. But these are the big things in August. Number 1 is the Mars-Jupiter conjunction on August 14th. This is the whole blow up. Again, this is kind of like, you'll kind of learn you can't do 2 things at once. This seems like a lot. I mean, like if I was going to have the Mars-Jupiter conjunction in anywhere in my chart, I would probably want it in my 5th house, to be honest with you. But it's Mars conjoining Jupiter is just always really explosive, and it's Jupiter and detriment. It's like, you're filling up a balloon that you think you could fill up super big, but it pops a lot earlier than you were anticipating. I think the analogy I've been using is like, when you're juggling 5 balls and someone throws in a 6th one, then everything falls apart. And why this Mars-Jupiter conjunction is so important, in my opinion, is that it tees us up for what is the long-term big meta transit for the year. So let me go back to Aquarius rising here. So we get Mars-Jupiter, right? So some sort of blow up, especially related to career and friends, because it's your 10th ruler conjoining your 11th ruler. So career and friends related to love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, as well as your 2nd ruler of money, like your 10th ruler of career conjoining your 2nd house ruler of money. It's already not doing all that well. And it's also your 3rd ruler conjoining your 2nd ruler. So like, again, maybe an expense in cars, or maybe you just get a little bit too financially deep into this. But this brings up the next thing, which is on August 19th, we have the Jupiter-Saturn square. What this is about is, like, after that explosion happens, you go, oh, I can't do both of these things. It's going to be in your fifth house. Again, Jupiter in your fifth house, Saturn in your second house. And this is just a big like wake up call where you kind of realize, oh, I can't financially afford these two expensive hobbies. Like, let's say you're into race car driving and you're also a hobby pilot, like, but you only make $80,000 a year. It's just not happening. And then, like, let's say your race car blows up or whatever. That's kind of the situation here. And Jupiter is directing your fifth house. It's trying to take the opportunities that it can. It's trying to expand things. But as Saturn's retrograde at this point, squaring Jupiter, you kind of go, oh, I can't know if I can do this. Like, because Saturn being retrograde, where you need to be more disciplined and more responsible with your finances and resources. You start kind of connecting the dots of this might be actually a lot harder to deal with than I imagined. That leads us to September. On the 1st, we have 1st of September, Pluto's moving into Capricorn. Back in your good old 12th house of isolation, subconscious, hidden enemies. Pluto loves being there. I'm sure you guys have totally enjoyed, your mental health over the past 16 years. Honestly, I've been calling it home sweet home, and it's our last hurrah. Pluto will only be here for 2 more months, so I'm not worried about it. Venus conjoins the South Node on September 3rd, again in your 9th house, so spirituality, religion, education for artists, travel. There was a Venus South Node conjunction happening here at the end of November of 2023, and I've just been calling it bittersweet. Like, Venus in Libra is kind of like, maybe you have a lot of clothes that are really, really nice, but they're not your style anymore, and it's time to get rid of them. But this is related to your beliefs, your worldview, religion, spirituality, foreign countries. I mean, literally, Venus rules your 4th house of living situation. It'll be transiting your 9th house of foreign countries. Maybe you live in a foreign country and you're like, I don't know if I actually like it here. This could be even like what you went to school for. If you are in college at this time, there's something about like, I like this. It is nice, but I'm not into it at the moment. And I need to move on and do something different. That is pretty much the whole vibe here. So then after we get that, Mars ingresses into Cancer on September 4th. This is where it gets challenging. It's in your 6th house of work, health, pets, routines, day-to-day activities. Mars rules your 10th house of career and reputation and legacy, and it's going to be fallen in the 6th house. Mars would rather be in Scorpio, Aries, or Capricorn. Those are all fighting signs. Cancer is about like babies and protecting things and nurturing and like safe environments. Mars doesn't do all that well there. So Mars gets really crabby. It gets really defensive. It gets very emotionally insecure and there's an inability to act upon things. And it's going into your 6th house of ill health, labor. Because like the 10th house is the title that you wear and the 6th house is the labor that goes into it. And so there's kind of this like mulling over and frustration with the work that entails that is required of you to do what you got to do. And I want you to think about April of 2023. April of 2023 was the last time we had Mars go through Cancer in your 6th. So even though this will be different because Mars will retrograde through here, you can get a good idea of what to expect here. So this is kind of like, maybe even health issues. You're not maintaining your health. You're not taking care of yourself. That's catching up to you. You're not wanting to do the work. There's something like, again, your 10th ruler is fallen in the 6th. Like, again, maybe for like example, well, the example that comes to my head is like you're a cop, but instead of doing like cool cop stuff, you're like pushing papers or something like that. Or like you're doing the worst work that you don't want to do. That's what's going on here. That brings us to October. So then when we start October on the 2nd, we get a solar eclipse in Libra. 9th house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, education, all those topics we just said before. And all you really got to do is think about what was going on for you, again, in October of 2023, that October 12th time of 2023, because that was the last time we had a solar eclipse in Libra. And this is, connecting the dots of October of 2023, the end of March of 2024. And now we get to hear, and this is this final goodbye of just like, the spiritual stuff, the social media, like everything's just draining and exhausting. And it's time to like purge something at this point. Like it's time to get rid of something. It's also 5th house related. So creativity, fun, and it's in the 9th house of like maybe you binge watch a bunch of crap on YouTube or whatever. Like this would be like getting on with your life and not doing that anymore. Then on October 4th, Mars enters shadow. Like I said, 6th house, work, health, habits, pets, routines. You might also have like pet issues during this time. Pay attention because Mars will come back to this in March of 2025. So we're in October. So that's like what, 5 months from this point? This is going to be some sort of issue related to health or work is going to come back up. There's an issue that happens here that will become very, very relevant over the preceding couple months. So this might involve, again, work, short distance travel for work. I mean, it's definitely work and career stuff related, okay? It really is. It's that simple. Although, again, it does rule your 3rd house too. So, again, maybe that's to do with communication, technology, and short distance travel. Those are the biggest things I can think of. Jupiter stations retrograde on October 9th. Again, still in your 5th house. Nothing's changed there. And so this is, again, a little bit more of that slowdown, not feeling as opportunistic with the 5th house of the love, romance, sex, pleasure. And that's not all the way of a bad thing, but this is just much more of and I really also like the analogy for Jupiter retrograde as I do for Saturn retrograde. It's like it's going from the classroom work to the field work. Like with Jupiter's about faith. It's super easy to believe in everything good when everything's going your way. But do you still have faith and believe in all the good when things aren't going your way? Like when you're not having fun? That's how I kind of see Jupiter retrograde. And it's now, Jupiter retrograde is being a little bit more like internal, what's the word? Investigating and thinking more deeply about what are your beliefs about love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, art, music, recreation. And there's a lot of slowdown here. Also, now that Saturn's retrograde, there's a big slowdown in money going on here. And then I actually fucked up. This is not a lunar eclipse in Aries on October 17th. But technically, I think there's an eclipse in Virgo and Pisces, but I almost don't even care about it because of by March of 2024 or 2025, there's so much going on that axis that, in my opinion, is much more important than a lunation that has an eclipse that doesn't technically have the nodes in it. But I'm looking at this lunation, whether it's an eclipse or not an eclipse in Aries, a couple days later on October 17th, because it is, for one, in your 3rd house, where the eclipses have been. What have you been spending all this time doing? It's ruled by Mars, and Mars is in Cancer, and it's ruled by the moon, and it will be squaring Mars. So there's a lot of and again, Mars is fallen, the sun is fallen, Venus is fallen. And Jupiter's fallen. There's this kind of big look at this full moon of just being like, why am I doing this? What am I doing? This sucks. I don't have the energy, and just feeling very playing the blame game, in my opinion. And so then we get to November. November's where things ramp up more. Mars is going to ingress into Leo on November 3rd, into your 7th house of relationships, partners, spouse, individuals. So this will be important because now this area of your life is getting super charged up. I do appreciate Mars in Leo at this moment, not forever, because Mars is going to retrograde. Remember, Mars is in shadow at this moment. But Mars in Leo is at least feeling more confident, feeling more proud, feeling more arrogant, feeling courageous. It's your 10th ruler in the 7th, so there is a big look at relationships related to work, but also your 3rd house, so technology, communication related to relationships and work. That's happening. But it's also Mars, fights, conflicts with relationships. Pretty simple. Mercury goes into shadow on November 7th. Again, Mercury at the end of the month here is going to retrograde in your 11th house of friends, networks, and communities. Expect more delays, expect more miscommunications, expect things not really always making sense with friends. But what's interesting about this is, I'll get to that. I'm going to get to that. Okay, so then we get to November 19th and Pluto moves back into Aquarius. Now, this is the big deal because now we're officially done with Pluto and Capricorn. We're not going to get that for I shouldn't say for not the rest of your lifetime, but who knows, by the time you're 80, maybe you could transplant your consciousness into a computer and maybe you will live to see the next Pluto and Capricorn. But Pluto will go into Aquarius pretty much for the next 2 decades, and we're done with Capricorn. And why this is important is from November of 2024 to July of 2025. Every outer planet is going to move into a new zodiac sign. So Pluto moves into Aquarius, Neptune moves into Aries, Uranus moves into Gemini, Saturn moves into Aries, and Jupiter moves into Cancer. So that, like, you don't have to know astrology to think, oh, every fucking planet moves into a new zodiac sign. That sounds auspicious. That sounds like an omen for something, and it is. And that starts with Pluto moving into Aquarius. Then after that, Saturn stations direct on November 15th. I know I just said after. I messed these up. Just bring these two back. But Saturn stations direct on November 15th. Second house, money, possessions. You know what you got to do. You know where you need to be disciplined and responsible. You know, something else to talk about is Saturn rules your 12th house of like hidden enemies and fears and self-sabotage, and it's in your second house of money. So like, stop fucking around. Stop fucking up. Like, that's kind of the message here. But that brings us to the next thing, which is on the 25th, Mercury stations retrograde in your 11th house. I think this is a funny Mercury retrograde. Mercury is literally known as the trickster, and I just want to show you why I think it's funny. Let me go back to Aquarius rising here. So Mercury is in detriment in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's zodiac sign. And Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini, which is Mercury's zodiac sign. And they're opposite one another, and they're both going to retrograde opposite one of another. This is just like the whole, again, your 11th ruler is in the planet that rules friends in your chart is in detriment, the 5th house of creativity and drugs, alcohol, vices, partying. And so there's kind of like, it's either like the friends that you have, like you don't really agree with what they do, or the things that you want to do recreationally, you don't have any friends to do. This is when all of this kind of gets sorted out, but it's like both planets are in detriment and they're both retrograde, where I mean, I'm sure some sort of solution is going to be figured out here, but this is just like it reminds me of a Dumb and I can't believe it took me until Aquarius to think of this, but this is like literally Dumb and Dumber. The Mercury retrograde of Dumb and Dumber, in my opinion. So that's what I'm now calling this Mercury retrograde. So, and that brings us to December. We get to the last month, and Mars stations retrograde 12/6. So here's the issue with this. And again, this is in your 7th house of relationships and other people. This is like having your tail tucked between your legs. This is losing, being discouraged, not having courage, not having, balls. Like Mars, it's literally like getting the balls snipped off, and there's some sort of reconstruction going on in your 7th house of relationships. And this involves your 10th house of career and your 3rd house, again, of communication, technology, short distance travel, siblings, neighbors. But this is where you have like Mars going to Leo is like, I've got all this confidence. And then Mars retrogrades in Leo, where it's like, I lost all this confidence that I don't actually feel like doing this anymore. And it's going to be tough. The good news is this part of the sky from Leo to Cancer, where Mars will retrograde, it will be bad from the winter of 24 into 2025. But then by the beginning of by 2025 into 2026, Jupiter's going to come through here and it'll solve all of your problems pretty much. So that sucks. And again, this is the build up to 2025. The new year time is just going to be really slow and mundane and frustrating. Mercury stations direct on 12/16. Dumb and Dumber figured out with the friends, the miscommunication stuff. And then we get to Christmas Eve. And that's the second Jupiter-Saturn square in your 5th house and your 2nd house. Now, here's the difference with these two. The first one in August was like, oh, I'm trying to take advantage of these opportunities to have fun, but you realized, oh, I'm still in a situation where I need to be more disciplined with money. This is the opposite, where you're like, I'm now knowing what I must do with my money, my finances, and resources, where I need to be more disciplined, what I am afraid of. And because I'm being more disciplined in this area, I'm willingly choosing one thing over the other. I don't have room to keep going in this creative field at this moment. Like, this is just kind of like, August is kind of like, oh shit, I can't do two of these things and whatever, versus this is like, hey, I'm just going to do this for right now. This is what I have to prioritize. This is what I think is important with my money and finances and my hobbies and my self-expression and whatnot. And that's this year. Make sure you like this video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you comment below. Again, let me know what month you're looking forward to the most. Let me know what month you're not looking forward to. Again, feel free to go and get the transit calendar for your iPhone or for Google Calendar. I think it's really awesome and it helps support the channel. And with that being said, I will see you guys next time.